When I married Jack, it felt like I had hit the jackpot of love. I know, it sounds like something out of a cheesy romance novel, but that's how I felt. Our wedding was nothing short of magical. The air was thick with the fragrance of blooming roses, and the sunset's golden rays shimmered across the crystal chandeliers that hung elegantly from the ballroom ceiling. As I walked down the aisle in my lace-trimmed gown, locking eyes with Jack, who looked dashing in his black tuxedo, I felt like the protagonist in my own fairy tale. "Oh, Janet, you look stunning," his mother, Karen, had whispered to me as we took photos. "We're so glad to have you as part of our family." "I couldn't be happier," I responded, grinning from ear to ear. It was true. I got along wonderfully with his parents, which was like a cherry on top of my already sweet life. Jack and I were the toast of the evening, with our friends and family singing praises of how perfect we were for each other. "You guys are so in sync, it's almost like watching a movie, my best friend," Lisa had said, champagne glass in hand. "It does feel like a dream," I admitted, squeezing Jack's hand. After the wedding, we moved into a cozy house that we both loved. It was a quaint cottage-style place, with a lovely little garden that Jack liked to fuss over. The interior was tastefully decorated, mostly with my choices, and Jack seemed to love everything I picked. "I thought this was where we'd grow old together, where we'd bring up our children, where we'd live out all our dreams." We settled into married life comfortably. While Jack had a good job initially, he eventually lost it due to some conflicts at his workplace. I didn't fret. I had a high-paying job as a marketing executive, and I loved the role reversal. Me going out and conquering the world while he took care of our cozy home. "So, what's the plan for dinner, Mr. Domestic?" I'd teasingly ask him over the phone during my lunch breaks. "Ah, Madam Breadwinner, would you fancy some homemade lasagna tonight?" he'd reply, and we'd both laugh. I admired his ability to adapt, to embrace change without letting it bruise his ego. We supported each other unequivocally, or so I thought. I reveled in the life we were building, believing in the strength of our vows and the love that had, until that point, seemed unbreakable. I celebrated my promotions with him, and he shared his hopes of starting a new job soon. "Don't worry about work, Jack," I'd tell him in the evenings, massaging his shoulders as he scrolled through job listings. "You'll find something you love, I'm sure of it." "I know, Janet. As long as we're together, everything will be all right," he would say. Those words lulled me into a sense of security, convincing me that I was living the ideal life, a perfect blend of professional success and personal happiness. But as I'd come to find out, even the most beautiful roses have thorns, and fairy tales aren't always what they seem. As it turned out, my seemingly perfect life was just the calm before a storm that would shake the very foundations of my world. The day started like any other. The sun filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow over the bedroom. Jack was in the shower, belting out tunes off, key, but with commendable gusto. I was still in bed, scrolling through my emails and planning out the workday ahead. His phone, lying on the nightstand next to mine, buzzed. A new message notification popped up on the screen. Waiting. It's odd how one simple word can flood your mind with possibilities. I reasoned with myself for a moment. It's probably nothing, I thought. Maybe it's just a friend or a family member, but then my gut protested. Something didn't feel right. The word waiting seemed to hang in the air, ominous and charged. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over his phone. I've always respected Jack's privacy, just as he respected mine. I felt a twinge of guilt, but something urged me to proceed. I picked up the phone and unlocked it. He never had a passcode, another testament to the trust we supposedly shared. The text was from someone named Chris Locksmith. My heart sank as I scrolled through the messages. The conversation was riddled with details, types of locks, availability, and even the cost. "Hey Chris, how quickly can you change locks on a house?" Jack had texted a week ago. "Pretty quick. Why? Someone move out," Chris had replied. "Sort of. I just need the locks changed ASAP," Jack insisted. "All right, Are we looking at a standard deadbolt or something fancier? Just make sure she can't get in, Jack's words stabbed at me. Okay, got it. You free this Friday? Perfect. She'll be at work. Let's do it then. Reading that conversation was like having the rug pulled out from under me. My head spun, my heart pounded, and my stomach churned. The weight of betrayal squeezed the air from my lungs. I put the phone back exactly where I found it and stared at the ceiling, attempting to process what I'd just read. This was not a random exchange. This was a meticulously planned betrayal. The bathroom door swung open, and Jack emerged, towel wrapped around his waist and another towel drying his hair. Hey, babe, you look a million miles away, he said, planting a quick kiss on my forehead. What's on your mind? Nothing, I forced a smile, my voice shaky, just thinking about work. Ah, the eternal grind, he said, chuckling as he moved towards the closet to get dressed. Well, if you're gonna be lost in thought, at least think about what you want for dinner tonight. I will, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. As he busied himself getting ready, my mind went into overdrive. I had to do something, to retaliate, or confront him, or both. Letting this slide was not an option. The betrayal was too great, too calculated. Jack had fired the first shot in a war. He didn't know we were fighting, and it was time for me to strike back. The world had shifted on its axis, and I was no longer the trusting, naive wife. As I put on my heels and grabbed my purse, ready to face another day in my unraveling life, I realized that the real message I'd received that day was a wake, up call. And as much as it hurt, I was about to answer it in a language Jack would never forget. That day at work, my mind was a battlefield. I oscillated between seething anger and stifling despair. It was difficult to concentrate on the string of meetings and deadlines that usually filled my day. My coworkers must have noticed my lack of enthusiasm, but no one asked. Maybe they chalked it up to stress or fatigue. Little did they know, my life was quietly falling apart. When I got home, I wore my best poker face. It was still a few hours until my life would irreversibly change, according to Jack's messages with Chris, the locksmith. We carried on our evening routine as if nothing had changed, but everything had changed. But everything had. Hey, love, how was your day? Jack greeted me at the door, taking my coat and briefcase, the very image of the doting husband. It was okay, I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. Oh, just another day in paradise, he said sarcastically, referring to his job-hunting efforts. I smirked. Well, we have each other, and that's what counts, right? He smiled back, wrapping his arms around me. The irony was thick, like treacle. Here we were, exchanging pleasantries, and yet he was planning to change the locks and toss me out of my own home in a matter of hours. A home that my income had primarily built, a sanctuary that was about to turn into a battlefield. Jack mentioned he was going out to the store to pick up some groceries. Need anything? He asked, innocently. No, I'm good, I replied, my heart pounding in anticipation. Once he was out the door, the clock started ticking. My plan wasn't complex, but it had to be executed carefully. I decided on hiding raw eggs around the house. It was a simple, yet effectively malicious act. In a few days, the smell would be unbearable, and he would have no idea what caused it. I took a carton of eggs from the fridge and began my devious mission. One egg was slipped into the hollow curtain rod in the living room. Another was tucked behind the fridge, taped securely, so it wouldn't roll out. I placed one inside a rarely used cupboard, and another one inside an old boot in the back of his closet. Each egg was a little deposit of revenge, a ticking time bomb set to go off in a cascade of foul stench. I took extra care to place them where they wouldn't be easily found, but their smell would permeate every corner of the house. Just as I was finishing, I heard the sound of his car pulling into the driveway. My heart jumped into my throat. Had he forgotten something and returned early? Was he on to me? No, It turned out he'd been gone for about the right amount of time for a grocery run. Nevertheless, I hurried back to the living room and pretended to be engrossed in a TV show. He came in, bags of groceries in hand. "Wow, you look really into that show. Anything exciting happen?" he asked. "Oh, you know, the usual drama," I replied, stifling the emotions boiling within me. He had no idea that the real drama wasn't unfolding on the television screen, but in the very house we stood in the life we had built together. As he went into the kitchen to put away the groceries, my eyes followed him. I felt a mix of vindication and sorrow. Sorrow for the love we'd lost and vindication for the revenge I'd plotted. If he could betray me so coldly, I had no qualms about my petty act of vengeance. Jack had already changed the locks in his heart, but I had just changed something far more immediate and foul. Soon, he'd know how it felt to have your home, your sanctuary, turned against you. The following day, I went about my usual routine, getting up early, kissing Jack goodbye, and heading to work. It was a challenging day, filled with back meetings and tight deadlines. Yet, there was a nagging thought at the back of my mind, a ticking clock reminding me of what awaited me at home. Finally, the workday came to an end. I drove back, navigating through rush hour traffic while grappling with a storm of emotions. As I pulled into our driveway, my heart raced. This was the moment of truth. I took a deep breath and inserted my key into the lock. It wouldn't turn. I tried again, jiggling it a little, thinking maybe the lock was jammed. Nothing. It was as I'd suspected. The locks had been changed. My phone buzzed in my purse, startling me. It was Jack calling. "Hey, Jack, I can't seem to get the door open. Is something wrong with the lock?" I asked, pretending to be oblivious. "Yeah, about that," he began, his voice tense. "You don't live here anymore, Janet." "What do you mean?" I feigned surprise, even though I knew all too well what he meant. "I've changed the locks." "I think it's time we took a break from each other," he declared, devoid of any emotion. I paused for a moment, absorbing the finality in his voice. Without another word, I hung up and sat in the car for a few minutes, staring blankly at the home we had shared, now locked to me, both literally and metaphorically. Then, almost robotically, I started the car and drove away. I headed to my mom's house, feeling defeated yet somehow vindicated. As I recounted the ordeal to her, she was aghast but supportive. "Oh, honey, I can't believe he would do this to you," she said, wrapping me in a warm embrace. "Yeah, Mom, I can't believe it either. But I'll be fine," I assured her, though I was far from fine. For the next couple of days, I stayed with my mom, nursing my emotional wounds and contemplating my next steps. I started making arrangements to move my belongings and consulted a lawyer about initiating divorce proceedings. As much as the reality stung, I had to look out for myself now. Jack had made it abundantly clear that we were on separate paths. On the third day, my phone rang. It was Jack again. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, the moment when my petty revenge would come to fruition. I couldn't help but feel a thrill of anticipation as I answered the call. "Why does the house smell so bad, Janet?" he blurted out, his voice tinged with confusion and irritation. My lips curled into a subtle, satisfied smile. "I don't know, Jack. I don't live there anymore, remember?" He paused, perhaps finally realizing the extent of his actions, perhaps puzzled by the mysterious, disgusting odor now filling the house. I didn't care to know which. Laughing, I hung up. A weight lifted off my shoulders. While this didn't make us even, it was a start. He had turned our home into a battlefield, but I had fired back. The stench that filled our house was more than just rotting eggs. It was the smell of a rotten marriage, of love soured and trust decayed. And just like that smell, our relationship was now beyond saving. Days turned into weeks, and the process of separating our lives unfolded with a sense of grim inevitability. Legal papers were filed, friends chose sides, and the once harmonious life we had built was compartmentalized into boxes and storage units. Yet, through all this, the one thing that remained unresolved was the smell that had infested the house. Jack called me multiple times, sometimes begging, sometimes demanding to know the reason for the intolerable stench. Each time, I simply laughed and hung up. It was petty, but it was my little triumph in a situation full of defeats. As the day of the divorce hearing approached, I was a whirlpool of emotions. Angry, sad, but also relieved. My lawyer had prepared me for what to expect, but no amount of preparation could quell the anxiety that swelled within me as I entered the courtroom. Jack was already there, dressed in a dark suit, a stark contrast to the man who used to wear jeans and casual shirts. He looked at me, his eyes searching for something, perhaps a sign of the woman he once loved, or perhaps a hint about the smell that still plagued him. I returned his gaze, my eyes cold, emotionless. We were two strangers now, bound by a crumbling history and some paperwork. Finally, the judge entered, and the hearing began. It was a blur of legal jargon, agreements, and signatures. The gravity of the situation weighed on me with each passing minute. I felt like a spectator in my own life, watching as the marriage I had once held dear was disintegrated into clauses and conditions. "Is there anything either of you would like to add before I finalize this divorce?" the judge asked, looking at both of us. Jack looked at me, then back at the judge. "No, Your Honor," he said softly. I hesitated. This was my last chance to confront him, to demand answers, to maybe even get some closure. But then I remembered the message that started it all, the plan, the lockout, and the unpleasant surprises we'd both orchestrated. "No, Your Honor," I finally said, echoing his sentiment. The gavel came down, its sound resonating in the courtroom, sealing the fate of our marriage. We were officially divorced. As I left the courthouse, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Jack. "I hope you're happy, Janet. The smell is unbearable. What did you do?" I looked at the message, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I could tell him about the eggs, the stench, and the petty satisfaction it gave me. But what would that accomplish? Our marriage was over. The locks had changed, and our paths had diverged, possibly forever. Instead, I typed, "It's over, Jack. Goodbye." And with that, I deleted his number, a final act of letting go. Driving back to my mom's house, I couldn't help but think about how life's unpleasant surprises often come without warning, derailing the best laid plans and shattering the most robust dreams. But sometimes, those unpleasant surprises are necessary, serving as bitter medicine to treat a festering wound, or in my case, revealing the rot that lay beneath the surface of a seemingly perfect marriage. I may have lost a husband, a home, and the life I'd known, but I'd gained something invaluable, clarity. And with that clarity came the strength to move on, even if the path ahead was uncertain and fraught with challenges. I realized then that I didn't need revenge to find closure. The smell that filled our home was the smell of a life gone sour, and just like that life, it was time to leave it all behind. Months passed, and I found myself gradually adjusting to my new life. The divorce, once an agonizing process, had now become a closed chapter. I had moved into a cozy apartment, closer to work, and had thrown myself into my career, finding solace and purpose in the daily grind. Mom was supportive, her home always open for Sunday dinners or emotional venting. My friends rallied around me, filling my calendar with brunches, movie nights, and uplifting talks. But despite their love and support, there was one last thing I needed to do to truly move on. It came unexpectedly, a wedding invitation from a mutual friend. Jack would likely be there, but instead of dread, I felt an odd sense of serenity. This was my chance for closure, to prove to myself that I had moved on, not just in action, but also emotionally. As I walked into the banquet hall, dressed in a simple yet elegant black dress, I scanned the room for Jack. It didn't take long to find him, standing near the bar, drink in hand. Our eyes met, and for a moment, the past came rushing back, Ah, torrent of memories, both good and bad. I took a deep breath and walked over. "Jack," I said, stopping a few feet from him. "Janet," he replied, his eyes unreadable. "How have you been?" The words felt surreal, like a script from a drama we were both reluctantly acting in. "Good, good. Busy with work. You?" "Same," I nodded. Awkward silence followed, a tangible tension that neither of us dared to break. Finally, Jack spoke. "Janet, I looked into his eyes, searching for sincerity. What I found was not the man who had plotted to lock me out of my own home, but someone humbler, perhaps even broken. "Thank you, Jack," I said softly. "I hope you find what you're looking for in life." A smile flickered across his lips, one that lacked its old arrogance. "You too, Janet." We stood there for a moment, each absorbing the finality of the conversation. Then, without another word, I turned and walked away. The band had started playing a slow song, a melodious tune that seemed to fill the air with a sense of nostalgic melancholy. As I joined my friends on the dance floor, I felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted. Closure didn't come from gloating or from having the last word. It came from freeing yourself from the chains of the past. Our marriage had ended, not with a bang, but with a whimper, not in flames, but in soft ashes. I realized then that revenge, while momentarily satisfying, was just a temporary salve on a deeper wound. True healing came from forgiveness, from letting go, from seeking peace instead of conflict. The cycle of bitterness had been broken, and in its place was a newfound resilience, a strength born from hardships and life's unpleasant surprises.